When I was 12 years old, my parents sent me to live with my uncle in the countryside to get rid of the useless twin. Years later, they were offended when I introduced them to my new family. At 12, my parents sent me to live with my uncle, my dad's older brother, in the countryside because they didn't want to take care of me anymore. They thought I was a burden and preferred to raise only my twin sister, who they believed was much more capable than I was. I won't deny it. She was way smarter than me. Unfortunately, I couldn't keep up. I was mostly average, but in a family of geniuses, being average is not enough. Both of my parents were doctors, and they decided that my sister and I would become doctors like them. But to be honest, I never had much interest in studying. I was more inclined towards creative activities. That's what I really wanted to do with my life. They used to put a lot of pressure on me, and I wasn't doing well in school. It didn't help that my parents didn't even try to encourage me to improve. They just insulted me and constantly compared me to my sister. My twin sister was used to that kind of treatment from a young age, but over time it only got worse and it became very difficult for me to focus on anything. By the time I reached high school at 12, I was doing so badly in everything that I was failing most of my classes. Even though I tried my best, I couldn't get better grades. My teachers constantly complained about me because they didn't know what things were like at home. They just thought I was lazy and not willing to try hard enough to improve. Even people at school compared me to my brilliant twin sister, who was doing much better than I was. I literally cried every night before going to sleep because every day, my parents made sure to remind my sister how much they loved her and remind me how much I disappointed them and needed to improve. One night, things got so bad that during dinner, they insulted me again for my grades. I lost control and they punished me for the next 2 weeks. That's when I decided to run away from home without even knowing where I would go. Obviously, I couldn't get very far and only made it to the nearby park, where I sat alone, sad and scared, in the dark. They found me there around 5 a.m. and had to call the police to find me. After taking me back home, that was the day they decided they would send me to live with my uncle in the countryside, where I could grow up with him and his family. When my parents told me they were sending me to live with my uncle and his family, I literally begged them many times not to do that I would improve and never disappoint them again, and that I wouldn't try to run away. But they didn't care about any of that. They told me I had let them down, and that they couldn't deal with it anymore. They had another daughter to take care of, and they couldn't spend all their time looking after someone who had proven to be useless time and time again. I didn't even believe that was true. They spent most of their time flattering my sister, barely worrying about me unless it was to mock me for how badly I was doing in school. Still, I kept begging them. And above all, I didn't want to be separated from my sister, as she was literally the only person who treated me well in that family. However, they didn't listen to me and did what they had to do. They made me say goodbye to my sister and didn't even allow her to travel with me to my uncle's house. Once I got there, I literally couldn't stop crying for the next few weeks and just wanted to go back home. I kept trying to call my parents, but my uncle and aunt were very kind and understanding during that time because they could understand what I was going through. But my parents didn't answer my calls and ignored me. A few weeks later, I decided to accept my fate and make peace with it. I stayed in touch with my sister. She was the only one who talked to me, but it had to be done secretly because I didn't have a phone. I had to call her from my uncle's house phone when they weren't around. Social media was just starting to get popular at that time, and fortunately, she used the computer to talk to me occasionally. When she said everything was clear, I would call her, and we could finally talk. My sister and I kept in touch. We loved each other, and we always will. She kept me updated on what had been happening with her and our parents over the last 10 years. She also told me that our parents were planning to contact me a couple of weeks ago, which allowed me to prepare mentally for that. For the last 10 years, I had absolutely no contact with my parents. Initially, it was because they refused to get in touch with me or even speak to me after they left me at my uncle's house. After spending a couple of years at my uncle's house, it was me who simply wasn't interested in getting back in touch with them. They had abandoned me, and that was the end of the story. Honestly, after moving in with my uncle and aunt, I was having a much better life. They didn't put me under the kind of pressure my parents did, and I started doing better in school. I was still average academically, not the outstanding student my sister always had been, but at least I wasn't failing all my classes. My uncle and aunt also allowed me to participate in other activities like school plays and sports, which my parents didn't let me do because they thought it would negatively affect my grades. I was living my life to the fullest, and I was very happy with them. When I lived with my parents, they also prohibited me from talking to boys because they thought it would distract me. However, my uncle and aunt didn't have those ridiculous restrictions and allowed me to talk to anyone I wanted. I could also bring friends over casually. That's actually how I met my husband, who has been with me all this time. We've been together for the last 6 years. We met in high school and have been inseparable ever since. We even went to the same university. I graduated from college last year, and a week later, so did he. But we visit them frequently, and they visit us too to see our son. I'm on maternity leave right now, so I don't have to go back to work for a few more weeks. My sister has been in open contact with me over the past few years because, after turning 18, she decided that she didn't feel the need to hide our bond from our parents. There was nothing they could do. She was the maid of honor at my wedding and is the godmother of my son. Last week, while visiting us, she told me that our parents were planning to visit me. They didn't know I was married and had a baby because practically everyone stopped talking to them after they abandoned me. It was such a cruel thing to do, so they knew nothing about my life. My sister didn't think it was necessary to talk to them about me, so she didn't tell them anything, even when they asked. But after 10 years, they were finally feeling some kind of remorse for what they did so many years ago, and planned to contact me. She thought it was her duty to tell me so I could decide what I wanted to do. I wasn't surprised when they contacted me, asking if they could visit a couple of days after my sister's visit. My parents actually got in touch with me through social media, asking if they could visit. They didn't apologize for anything, just a simple message with both of them asking if they could visit me, nothing more. I felt a little disappointed by that message because I was really expecting at least an apology for how they had treated me in the past. So for a while I was so upset that I thought about not responding to that message at all. But then I had a better idea. I thought I would invite them to my house and show them my current life, because now I had a great life. I thought it would be a good idea to let them know how well I was doing without them. So, I gave them my address and invited them to dinner over the weekend. I also invited my uncle, my aunt, and my sister, and of course, my husband and my son would be there because that dinner would be held at my house. I didn't tell my uncle and aunt that my parents would be there. So everyone was very surprised when they arrived at my house last weekend. This happened 3 days ago, and I still don't know if I did the right thing or not. Anyway, once everyone was here, things were pretty awkward because obviously I hadn't seen my parents in 10 years, and everyone in the family had cut them off. That included my uncle and aunt since they didn't want to have anything to do with my parents either. The reason for that was that my parents had promised that they would not only support me financially while I lived with my uncle, but they would also stay in touch to make sure I didn't feel alone and that my emotional needs were being met. But they only fulfilled half of that promise. They sent money every month but didn't bother to stay in contact with me, and they were happy to get rid of me. That wasn't the deal my uncle had agreed to, and he was upset because my parents were emotionally abandoning me. However, he didn't mind taking care of me. So, he was the one who defended me and told the rest of the family what my dad was doing. Everyone else cut off my father for that reason, which created a lot of animosity between them, but my dad kept sending money until I turned 18. After that, there was no contact between them. After we greeted each other, we were supposed to have dinner together. I decided to make a toast before that. As if things weren't awkward enough, I decided to lean into it and make it even worse because I wanted my parents to feel regret and feel bad. So I stood up and started making a speech about how beautiful the last 10 years of my life had been compared to the first 12. I made it seem like a speech for my uncle and aunt because, honestly, they had done so much for me over the last decade, and I don't think I could have gotten as far in life without them. I also thanked my husband for being with me the whole time, and my sister for never giving up on me despite everything that had happened. Very deliberately, I chose to ignore my parents in my speech because I had nothing to thank them for. They noticed because during my entire speech, they kept their heads down and didn't say a word. Once I finished my speech, I decided to insist even more and turned to my parents, telling them that I was finally ready to introduce them to my new family. They were completely surprised when I announced that because I don't think they expected me to say something like that. As soon as I said this was my new family, my mom burst into tears and literally ran out. After they left, we had a very awkward and quiet dinner. No one stayed for dessert, and I was glad because it was a very heavy situation. I didn't like my parents, but I don't think what I did was right. I haven't had the chance to talk to my uncle and aunt yet, but my sister and my husband both think I went a little too far and that I shouldn't have even responded to my parents' messages if I didn't want to interact with them. But insulting them like that was simply unnecessary. Am I the bad one for inviting my parents to dinner and then humiliating them? Update 1. So far, the comments have been quite divided on whether I should apologize to my parents or not, but everyone agrees that at the very least, I should talk to my uncle and aunt. Since there's still no consensus about my parents, I decided to contact my uncle today. It's been a week since the family dinner I organized, and we hadn't been able to talk much in the last few days because I was very busy, and they were too. I also think the awkwardness was still there, so we didn't talk much to avoid making things more uncomfortable. Today, I addressed the issue by calling my uncle, and before he could say anything, I told him that I was really sorry for inviting my parents to the dinner that day without even informing them. He said he was a bit surprised that I had done that, but eventually he got over it. He just hadn't reached out to me because he wasn't sure how I was feeling after that night since I was pretty upset. He agreed that things had gotten quite awkward that day, but told me that it was all water under the bridge and didn't matter anymore. Then I called my aunt and apologized to her too. She had a similar reaction. So now that I've apologized to both of them, and that's out of the way, I don't feel as guilty anymore. Personally, I don't feel that I owe my parents an apology. After everything they put me through during my childhood, I really don't think anyone would feel sorry for behaving the way I did. They still haven't apologized to me, so I don't see any reason to do so. I talked to my husband about this too, since he had said that I should apologize to them, and I explained to him that even though what I did at the dinner was unjustified, the way they treated me in the past was also unacceptable. He seemed to understand where I was coming from, so he didn't push it further. I told the same thing to my sister, and she was a bit iffy about it, but then she told me that at the end of the day it was my decision. I was the one who had been wronged, so whatever I chose to do would be fair. She hasn't been able to get in touch with our parents either over the last week, as they've been suspiciously quiet. But I guess they're just staying out of things for now. They'll definitely get in touch with me again and probably demand an apology or try to stir up some drama. Update 2. Hello, I just wanted to clarify something. My sister isn't trying to be diplomatic by maintaining a good relationship with our parents. And even if she is, I'm okay with that. It doesn't need to become a big issue in the comments section, which I've been noticing. She knows what they did to me was very wrong, but she was also very young. It wasn't like she could have defended or protested for me back then. She was against the idea at the time, but we were so small that our opinions really didn't matter, so she couldn't have done anything. She did the best she could and she stayed in contact with me, so that's enough. The reason she still keeps in touch with our parents is because they are getting older, and she doesn't want to abandon them because that would make her feel guilty. There's nothing more to it. It's not really that deep. So please don't accuse her of anything. It's completely unnecessary. We have a lot of love between us, so we don't think the comments being made about her are justified. Now, moving on to what happened. As I mentioned in my last update, towards the end, I was pretty sure that my parents wouldn't just let things go and accept what I did kindly. They simply aren't the type of people who let things slide easily. So, I had been prepared for some kind of retaliation from them. It finally happened today, 10 days after the dinner I organized. They decided to make the incident public, and they actually posted everything on social media. I thought that was pretty surprising because they don't really have an active presence on social media, but just for this incident, they decided to post about it. Just as I expected, it was a very one-sided post where they only talked about how hurt they were, but didn't mention any of the things they had done in the past. Honestly, I wouldn't have cared about that post if it had been directed at our family members, as no one in my family likes my parents for what they did in the past, abandoning me and other things. But they were very clever in the whole matter and decided to move forward and tag my coworkers and my husband's coworkers as well, even though he wasn't involved in this fiasco at all. Obviously, my coworkers weren't aware of my history with my parents or my tense relationship with them, so they were all pretty surprised when they tagged them in that post, and my phone started blowing up almost immediately. I'm on maternity leave, so I obviously didn't know what they had posted since I wasn't at work, and I don't really check my social media that often because I'm usually busy with my baby. But after they started messaging me, telling me to check what happened online, I was shocked. I didn't know how to react because I wasn't expecting anything like this. I was pretty sure they had been stalking my coworkers' accounts online because I have a lot of pictures with them and tagged them in them. That's probably what they had been doing the last week, stalking, trying to figure out who I was friends with at work so they could ruin my reputation. Anyway, I saw that post and was shocked for a couple of minutes, but then I decided to comment and tell people the reality of the situation. I had nothing to hide. I was the victim in this situation, and what happened at the dinner was unjustified but not unfair. So, I wrote about the whole incident that had taken place, how they had left me at my uncle's house all those years ago, and then refused to stay in contact with me. Even when they did contact me, they didn't apologize. After I got to my house, they still hadn't apologized. If they had, I might have reconsidered saying the things I said, but in my opinion, what I did wasn't wrong. I also clarified the same thing to my coworkers who had been tagged in the post. I apologized to them on behalf of my parents because they didn't need to be involved in our drama, and it was really ridiculous of my parents to do something like this. Obviously, I'm pretty upset because they could have addressed me directly and kept things clean, but dragging my coworkers into this was below the belt and unacceptable. I've been waiting for my husband to come home. I didn't want to bother him at work with this today because he told me he had an important meeting with a client. Otherwise, I would have contacted him and told him about this. But honestly, this is just petty drama, and I can handle it on my own. I already talked to my sister, and she thinks our parents are acting crazy right now. They probably just couldn't tolerate the disrespect anymore and completely lost their composure, and I think that's exactly what happened. But even then, nothing justifies this kind of behavior. I haven't even told my uncle or aunt about this yet because I'm sure they will have very strong reactions to this, and I don't want to bother them with this right now because they're pretty busy with work. Update 3. A couple of hours have passed since I posted my last update. It's 8 p.m. right now, and everyone is at my house. My uncle, my aunt, my sister, and my husband just got back from work. We're all just trying to figure out how to deal with this situation. I don't want to go to a lawyer like many of you suggested. I really don't have the time or energy to file a petition and then deal with it. It's just not necessary. I want to handle this personally and keep lawyers out of it for as long as possible. Of course, if they refuse to take down the post, then I might have to contact a lawyer and file a defamation lawsuit or whatever they consider appropriate. But until then, we're doing everything we can to get it removed. So far, everyone has texted them asking them to take it down, but they haven't cared about any of that. They haven't even responded to our messages. I don't know what they're thinking. They haven't even bothered to remove my comment. So, at least everyone who sees that post will know the truth. A significant number of people have seen that post, and it's getting a lot of attention for some reason, which isn't good for me because I don't come out looking very good in that post. Not just my coworkers who were tagged saw the post, but also some of my acquaintances saw it, and they've been asking me about it. I don't know how it showed up in their feed. Probably because I was tagged in the post too. I've already removed that tag, but it still appears in people's feeds. I assumed there must be some glitch with the app, but it's not good for me. People are asking me about it, and I'm tired of answering their questions. They could just read my comment and be done with it, but for some reason they feel the need to contact me personally and ask me about it over and over again. It's getting really annoying, and I just want this to end. Honestly, I'm just crossing my fingers that I don't get contacted by HR, because that could cause problems for me. I really don't want to ruin my reputation at work because of my parents, so up until now, my family and I are still trying to figure out a way to make them take it down, but they're not responding. Tomorrow, my sister told me she's going to visit my parents and ask them to remove it in person. That might work. And if they still refuse, we won't have any other choice but to go after them with a lawyer. I really hope it doesn't come to that because it will be a lot of work for me. And right now, I just want to spend time with my son. That's what my maternity leave is for, not to deal with their stupid antics. Update 4. Hi! So, my sister went to visit my parents. I had no idea what was happening, but half an hour ago, she told me that she had spoken with them and that they were very upset. The reason for the post and tagging my coworkers was because my guess was correct. They had been able to find my coworkers and their social media accounts by following me. That was pretty creepy on their part, but well, that's literally the least of my concerns right now. Anyway, she told me that she had a long discussion with them, and they said they would gladly remove the post, but only if I apologized to them first. I immediately told my sister that was not going to happen because I didn't do anything wrong, and I'll stick with that. Thankfully, she knew I wasn't going to apologize, so she told them that it didn't matter, and I wasn't going to pretend to apologize for something I didn't even do wrong. They could save their time and energy and just remove the post, or otherwise I'd go after them with a lawyer, which wouldn't be good for them. That discussion lasted almost an hour, and in the end, they decided they would take the post down and end it there. But they also told my sister to tell me that they were excluding me from their lives and the inheritance as well. Honestly, I don't care about any of that. I just want the post taken down. They can keep their inheritance. It doesn't matter to me. My husband and I are doing quite well in our careers, and we know we'll be fine. At least I don't have to depend on them for money. My sister told me she said the same thing to them, so at least they're aware of how I feel about it. Anyway, now that that's resolved, I'm going to spend the rest of my maternity leave with my son and make the most of it before I have to go back to work. Thank you so much for all the support you've shown me. Update 5. Well, my parents deleted the post since it didn't reflect well on them after the rest of the family found out. As I mentioned, the rest of the family cut them off because of what they did to me. So when they read that, they sided with me and attacked my parents. Some commented on the post, while others cited it and made their own posts. I wish I could say I liked this outcome, but the only thing I wanted was for them to stop talking about me. The good news is that at least my parents deleted the original post, and then I spoke with my relatives, and they did the same with theirs. Anyway, I thanked them for standing by me. Without a doubt, that meant a lot to me. Being the abandoned child creates some psychological damage, so it feels good to be loved.